Hey guys, welcome back to the Readers. I hope you are having an amazing day. Let's get right into the stories. The first one is an entitled people story. Ever wonder how far an HOA can really go? My HOA board thought they could take my parking spot, a spot I own with its own separate deed, and give it to one of their own. They ignored my lawyer, fined me daily, and called a tow truck. So how did a single police report end up costing them thousands and getting her kicked off the board? I want to start by saying that I am genuinely not a confrontational person. I pay my HOA dues on time. I keep my unit clean. I never blast music past 10. In 4 years of living in this complex, I had never once filed a formal complaint or raised my voice at a board meeting. I was the definition of a low-maintenance resident. So if you had told me a year ago that I would end up in a legal battle with my HOA, that a police officer would be standing in our parking garage telling a board member she was one wrong move away from a criminal charge, and that I would eventually file a lawsuit against the association for slander of title and harassment, I would have laughed at you. But here we are. Let me back up and explain the setup because the details matter a lot here. The complex I live in is one of those places that was genuinely luxurious when it was built in the mid-80s. High ceilings, wide hallways, solid construction, the whole thing. It has aged reasonably well, but the parking situation is a disaster that was baked in from the very beginning. The place was designed for a quieter era when most households had one car and nobody had an SUV the size of a small ship. The garage has exactly as many spots as there are units, 0 guest spaces, and absolutely no room to expand because the building is sandwiched between a 4-lane road on one side and, on the other side, a massive entertainment venue that draws thousands of cars on weekend nights. On event nights, street parking within a 10-minute walk is completely gone by 5 in the afternoon. If you do not have a spot in that garage, you are genuinely stuck. This is important context because it explains why parking is the single most emotionally charged topic in the entire building. People have screamed at neighbors over parking. Relationships have ended over parking. One guy on the 3rd floor apparently moved out specifically because of a parking dispute, though the details on that one are fuzzy. The point is, parking here is not a small thing. It is everything. Now here's the part that sets my situation apart from everyone else's. Most residents have what the original governing documents call a licensed spot. What that means in practice is that the HOA owns the physical space and your unit comes with the right to use a specific spot. The HOA controls those spots. They can, within the rules, make changes to the licensed spots. My spot is different. When I bought my unit, I bought it from the original owner. This person had purchased directly from the developer back in 1987 and had negotiated something unusual at closing. Spot 42, the one attached to my unit, was sold to her outright. Not licensed, not assigned, sold. She received a separate deed for that space, and when I bought the unit from her estate, I received both the deed for the unit and the deed for Spot 42. The county assessor's office treats them as 2 separate parcels. Spot 42 has its own parcel identification number. I pay a small but real and separate property tax assessment on it every year. It is, in every legal sense, my dirt. I knew this when I bought the place. My real estate attorney flagged it during closing and actually seemed a little excited about it. He explained that deeded parking in a condo complex was unusual and that it essentially meant the HOA had 0 authority over my spot. None. They could not reassign it, fine me for using it wrong, or take any action regarding it without going through the same legal process required to take anyone's private property. It was mine in the same way my living room was mine. I filed it away as interesting trivia and then more or less forgot about it because for 4 years nobody ever challenged it. I parked in Spot 42 every day. I paid my taxes. Life was fine. Then the board got a new member. She joined the board after the previous treasurer resigned and moved out of state. Elections in our building are low turnout affairs where maybe 15% of residents actually participate, so if you campaign even a little, you can win easily. She campaigned. She got herself onto the board, and within about 3 weeks, everyone in the building knew who she was. The car was part of it. She drove this enormous luxury SUV, the kind with 3 rows of seats and a turning radius roughly equivalent to an aircraft carrier. In our cramped garage, it was immediately obvious that her licensed spot was not going to work for her. The spot was a standard size. The SUV was not. She would pull in at an angle, take up part of the adjacent space, and seem genuinely baffled that this was considered a problem. When the person in that adjacent spot complained to the board, she voted against any action being taken against herself. That is the kind of person we are dealing with. I was not paying much attention to any of this because, again, it had nothing to do with Spot 42. Then I came home from a 12-hour shift on a Thursday evening, pulled into the garage, turned toward my spot, and saw it. A sign had been professionally bolted into the asphalt. Not a cardboard sign or a laminated sheet of paper, an actual metal post with a proper placard that read "Reserved for board member." The sign was sitting in Spot 42. My car was now sitting in the middle of the driving lane because I had no idea what to do. I was still sitting there, engine running, when she appeared from the elevator area. She had clearly been watching for residents to arrive, because she came out immediately and walked directly toward me. She told me, with genuine irritation and zero apology, that this was now her spot and that I needed to move my car. I asked her if she understood that this was my assigned spot. She said the board had optimized community assets and that any complaints needed to be submitted through the proper channels. She then told me my car was an eyesore and that she had executive accessibility needs that required a larger space. I want to be clear about what my car is. It is a 4-year-old mid-size sedan that is clean and in good condition. It is not a custom vehicle, not modified in any way, not painted an unusual color. She called it an eyesore because she wanted me to feel small and move on without pushing back. That is the tactic of someone who has spent years getting their way through social pressure alone. I moved my car to an open guest spot in a neighboring private lot nearby, and I spent that evening going through the documents I had for the unit. I found the original deed for Spot 42. I found the most recent property tax statement, which listed both my home parcel and the parking parcel separately. I found the county's online parcel search and pulled up the current record for Spot 42, which showed me as the owner of record, showed the parcel identification number, and showed the assessed value. Then I emailed my real estate attorney, who I had stayed in touch with over the years. I laid out exactly what happened. His response came back within a few hours, and it was 2 sentences long. The first sentence said this was a straightforward case of attempted seizure of private property. The second sentence gave me the name of a property rights attorney at his firm and told me to call first thing in the morning. I called. In the meantime, the HOA sent out a building-wide message. The subject line described it as an update about parking optimization. The body of the message explained that the board had the authority to reassign any spot in the garage for administrative and community necessity, that this process was consistent with the governing documents, and that residents with concerns should attend the upcoming Coffee with the Board session. There was no mention of Spot 42 by number, and there was certainly no mention that any specific spot had already been seized and given to a board member. I went to the coffee session. It was held in the lobby on a Saturday morning, and there were maybe 12 residents there, most of them clearly already frustrated about something. She sat at the front with the board president and one other member. The whole thing had the energy of a deposition that everyone was pretending was casual. When they opened the floor for comments, I raised my hand and asked a very simple question. I asked by what legal authority the board was reassigning deeded private property. I kept my voice completely level. I did not accuse anyone of anything. I just asked the question. She looked at me with the expression of someone who has never been genuinely challenged in a public setting and said it was community land and that if I did not understand that, I should read the governing documents. I said I had read the governing documents and that they did not address the reassignment of property owned by individual residents under a separate recorded deed. She said I was new here and that I did not understand how things worked in the building. I had lived there for 4 years. She had lived there for 8 months. Another board member, the one sitting at the end of the table, asked quietly what deed I was referring to. I gave a brief and factual explanation of the 1987 purchase, the deeded spot, the separate parcel number, and the property taxes. The room got very quiet. The board member at the end of the table wrote something down. She told me I could take it up with the board in writing and that the session was not the place for individual disputes. She moved on to the next person. My attorney had sent me a cease and desist before that meeting, but I had not delivered it yet because I wanted to attend the session first. The following Monday, a process server delivered it to the management office addressed to the HOA board. The document identified Spot 42 by its legal description and parcel number. It noted that the spot was privately owned real estate, not common area. It demanded that the board immediately remove the sign, cease and desist from any further interference with the owner's use of the property, and provide in writing which specific provision of the governing documents the board believed authorized the seizure of individually owned deeded real estate. The cease and desist also noted that failure to comply would result in the filing of a civil lawsuit, and that if any vehicle other than the owner's was towed from or occupying the space, the HOA would face additional claims. I expected them to back down at this point. That would have been the rational response. Read the cease and desist, consult their HOA's own attorney, confirm that yes, this spot is privately owned, remove the sign, apologize, done. Instead, she convinced the rest of the board to hold firm. She told them, according to what I later learned from the board member who had written things down at the coffee session, that I was bluffing. She said I had a standard license spot like everyone else, and that my attorney was throwing legal-sounding language around to intimidate them. She was so certain of this that the board voted to proceed. A week and a half after the cease and desist was delivered, I received a formal notice of violation. According to the notice, I had been parking in a board-reserved spot without authorization, and I was being fined $100 per day retroactively from the day she had claimed the spot. The math they did in that notice came to over $1,000 in fines for parking in my own property. They also included a line stating that if the vehicle currently occupying the reserved spot was not removed by the end of that week, it would be towed at the vehicle owner's expense. I forwarded the violation notice to my attorney. He added a civil harassment claim to the lawsuit he had been preparing. Then we waited. That Friday night, I got home from dinner around 9 and parked in my spot as I had been doing all week. I had my attorney's advice and a clear legal basis, and I was not going to abandon my own property because someone had bolted a sign into it. I sat in my car for a minute checking my phone, and that is when I saw a tow truck pull into the garage entrance. The driver was a professional doing a job, and I have no ill feelings toward him. He pulled up, confirmed the spot number against a work order he had on his phone, and started positioning his truck. He had not yet hooked anything up. I got out of my car. I did not approach him, and I did not get in the way of his equipment. I called the non-emergency police line and reported an attempted theft of a motor vehicle from private property and trespassing on privately owned real estate. Then I leaned against the wall and waited. Within a few minutes, she came out of the elevator. She must have been monitoring the garage on her phone or gotten a call from the tow driver. She walked up to the driver and told him to proceed, that she was a board member and had authorized the tow. 2 patrol officers arrived about 8 minutes later. It is a credit to the department that they took the call seriously, because from the outside a condo parking dispute sounds trivial. But the words trespass and property theft get a different kind of attention than a noise complaint, and both officers came in ready to actually understand what was happening. I introduced myself as the owner of record of the vehicle and the owner of record of the parking space. I handed the first officer a folder I had prepared which contained a copy of the original 1987 deed for Spot 42, the most recent tax statement showing both parcels under my name, and a printout from the county assessor's website showing the current ownership record with the parcel identification number clearly highlighted. She inserted herself immediately. She told the officers she was a board member, that the HOA governed all parking in the building, and that she had the authority to have unauthorized vehicles removed from reserved spaces. Her voice had climbed about half an octave from its usual tone. The first officer looked at the documents I had given him, then looked at the county printout showing the parcel number. He asked her one question. He asked whether the HOA owned the parcel identified on the document I had provided. She said all parking in the building was community property. He said that was not what he had asked. He asked her again whether the HOA owned the specific parcel identified on the county record. She said the governing documents gave the board authority over all parking. He turned back to me and asked if I had any documentation connecting this specific physical space to the parcel on the county record. I handed him the original 1987 deed, which described the space by its number and physical location within the garage. He compared it to the county record. He looked at the metal sign still bolted into the asphalt of my spot. He looked at her. He told her clearly that if the tow truck touched the vehicle, it would be a criminal matter. The car was parked on property belonging to the registered owner of that property. Removing it without the owner's consent would not be a civil HOA dispute. It would potentially be theft, and it would potentially be criminal trespass. She started to say something about board authority, and he stopped her. He said she needed to let the tow company leave, and that anything else needed to go through a civil court, not a tow truck. The tow driver was already detaching his rigging before the officer finished the sentence. He told me quietly, as he was leaving, that whoever had hired him had given him a work order that identified the spot as HOA common area. He said he would be billing the HOA for the call since the job could not be completed due to a misrepresentation on the work order. She stood in the garage for a long time after the officers left. The other officer had stayed for a few minutes to make sure things remained calm. Once both of them were gone, she looked at me and said this was not over. I said I agreed with her completely. Over the next few days, I learned through a couple of residents who had been at that Saturday coffee session and had since become quietly supportive of my position that the rest of the board was furious. They had relied entirely on her word that my spot was a standard licensed space. None of them had done any independent verification before voting to proceed. Now the HOA had a cease and desist in its file, a lawsuit being prepared against it, a tow company invoice for a call it had ordered under false pretenses, and a police report documenting that it had attempted to seize private property. The board member who had written things down at the coffee session called an emergency meeting without her presence. He had apparently gone directly to the county assessor's website after our conversation that Saturday and confirmed everything I had said within about 5 minutes. He had then spent a week trying to talk her into backing down and resolving things quietly. She had refused every time. Now the situation had produced a police incident, and the HOA attorney was being looped in under circumstances that were going to cost real money. The day after the police incident, I also went to the county clerk's office in person. My attorney had suggested this as a precautionary measure. When a party is disputing your ownership of real property, even incorrectly, it creates a risk that some paperwork connected to their claim could cloud your title. Clouded title can complicate future sales or refinancing. The clerk helped me pull the full chain of title on Spot 42, and I made certified copies of every relevant document going back to the original 1987 transaction. I also filed a formal notice of the pending litigation, which is a document that attaches to the property record and tells anyone searching the title that there is an active legal dispute. It is a standard protective move, but it also meant that the HOA's own title now had a notation on it connected to their actions. Their attorney noticed that quickly. While I was waiting for the legal process to move forward, the day-to-day situation in the garage remained tense. She had not removed the sign. I was still parking in my spot, directly next to the sign, every single day. She was parking her SUV in a different licensed spot down the row, one that happened to belong to a unit being rented by a quiet younger couple who had apparently agreed to trade spaces temporarily. Whether that was a voluntary trade or something she had pressured them into, I never found out for certain. There were other residents watching this unfold, and the building's general mood toward her was shifting. A few people who had complained about her SUV taking up parts of their spots had their complaints dismissed by the board in the weeks before this situation started. Once word got around that she had tried to take my deeded spot and had been stopped by the police, some of those residents started asking harder questions about what else she had done under the board's cover. 2 things happened in the following week that I found out about only later. The first was that the tow company sent its invoice to the HOA management company. The amount was not enormous, but it was real money, around $300 for the call-out and the truck time. More importantly, the invoice included a note from the tow company's dispatcher explaining why the job had not been completed. The note said the work order had incorrectly described the spot as HOA common area when it was in fact privately owned real estate, and that the company reserved the right to decline future work from the HOA if inaccurate information was provided on work orders again. That note got forwarded to the full board. The second was that the HOA's insurance carrier, which had been notified of the pending lawsuit by the HOA attorney, sent back a preliminary letter indicating that coverage might be limited or unavailable for claims arising from actions that constituted intentional interference with private property rights. Insurance carriers get very specific when the word intentional appears in a claim. The board found this out during a regular check-in call with the management company, and the news was not warmly received. My attorney had filed the lawsuit by the time that emergency meeting happened. The claims were civil harassment, slander of title, which is a specific cause of action for wrongfully clouding or challenging the ownership of real property, and seeking reimbursement for all legal fees and costs. The HOA attorney reviewed the filing and reportedly went back to the board with an assessment that was not favorable to their current position. The deeded status of Spot 42 was, in his words, not a gray area. What the board was now looking at, if they allowed this to go to trial, was a near-certain loss on the core ownership question, a judgment that would include my legal fees, potential punitive damages given the documented pattern of harassment after they received the cease and desist, and no insurance coverage to offset any of it. Every dollar would come from HOA reserves. Every resident in the building would effectively be paying for a mistake that one board member had made and then refused to walk back at every opportunity she had been given. The board member who had been quietly trying to fix things told the emergency meeting all of this. He laid out the sequence of events in order. The cease and desist arrived and they ignored it. The violation notice and tow threat were issued anyway. The police were called to the garage. A police report now existed. The lawsuit was filed. The insurance carrier had flagged the claim. The tow company had billed them. The title cloud was on record. All of this from a situation that could have been resolved on day one by simply looking up a parcel number. He reportedly asked her directly in front of the other board members whether she had ever actually verified that Spot 42 was a licensed spot before she took action on it. The room went quiet while she answered. She had not verified it. She had assumed. That was the moment the rest of the board understood the full picture. They had been lied to, or at minimum deeply misled, by someone whose confidence had been so absolute that none of them had thought to check her work. And now they were all on the hook for it together, unless they made some very deliberate decisions very quickly. The board member who had been keeping me loosely informed called me 2 days after that emergency session. He told me nothing detailed because he was careful about his role in things, but he let me know that the board was now working directly with the HOA attorney and that I should expect contact from that attorney soon through my own legal counsel. He said the rest of the board had a clear understanding of the situation. That was all he said. It was enough. The call between attorneys happened the following week. Their position had completely reversed. Where the HOA had previously been insisting that the board had full authority over all parking in the building, they were now acknowledging that Spot 42 was privately deeded property, that the action taken against it had been unauthorized, and that they wished to resolve the matter without proceeding to trial. My attorney told me their tone was businesslike and genuinely apologetic, which he said was usually a sign that their client had been read the full situation in no uncertain terms. The negotiation itself did not take long because there was not much to negotiate. The facts were not in dispute anymore. The only question was what it would take to resolve the lawsuit. My attorney and I had discussed this in advance. I was not trying to extract a huge payout. I was not trying to bankrupt the HOA or punish every resident in the building for one person's decisions. What I wanted was simple and specific. I wanted every fine they had issued reversed and removed from my account entirely. I wanted a written acknowledgement from the board that Spot 42 was and had always been my private deeded property, and that the HOA had no authority over it. I wanted the HOA to pay all of my legal fees, and I wanted a permanent professional sign installed in Spot 42 at the HOA's expense identifying it as private property and warning that trespassing would result in legal action. Not a cheap laminated notice, a proper mounted sign, the kind that lasts. The last item was the one my attorney said made him genuinely happy to be in this line of work. They agreed to all of it. There was one additional item that I had not included in my formal demand list, but that the board pursued independently. About a week after the settlement terms were accepted, she resigned from the board. I was not part of that conversation, and I do not know exactly how it went. What I was told afterward was that the rest of the board made clear to her that her continued presence made the HOA legally and reputationally vulnerable, and that they did not see a path forward with her in the role given what had happened. Whether she agreed to go quietly or needed more persuading, she was off the board by the end of that month. The fines were cleared from my account within the same week the settlement was signed. The HOA attorney sent a letter to my attorney confirming the written acknowledgement of my ownership of Spot 42 and attaching the formal document. My attorney's fees were paid directly by the HOA within 30 days, as agreed. The whole invoice, which was not small, given everything that had been involved. The sign went up on a Tuesday morning. I happened to be home that day and I watched the installer do the work from my window. It is a solid mounted sign, properly sized, black lettering on white, attached to a steel post that is bolted through the asphalt into the concrete below. It says private property, Spot 42, and then the relevant details about unauthorized vehicles being subject to tow and legal action. My name is not on it because I did not want that, but my parcel number is, which is actually better from a legal standpoint. It looks very official. I am unreasonably pleased with it. As for her, she is still in the building. I pass her occasionally in the elevator or the lobby. She does not make eye contact, which suits me fine. Her SUV, which was the entire origin of this situation, is now parked in a licensed spot down at the far end of the garage, one of the spots near the entrance to the overflow area the building uses for guests. It is a tight squeeze for a vehicle that size. Getting in and out of it requires multiple adjustments. I know this because I have seen her do it. The overflow lot that she originally suggested I use when she told me to clear out of my own space, the one 3 blocks away and poorly lit, is where residents without a workable garage spot have to park on event nights when the nearby venue fills the streets. She parks there on weekends now when someone else needs the licensed spot she is using. I do not know who the resident is who needs it, but I appreciate the poetry. Every morning when I park, I walk from spot 42, which is in a good position near the elevator, directly into the building. The walk takes about 30 seconds. Sometimes she is coming in from the other end of the garage at the same time, from wherever she has managed to fit the SUV that particular day. I give her a small wave. She has never waved back. That is fine. The wave is not for her. It is for me. People ask me sometimes whether the whole thing was worth it, meaning the stress and the legal fees and the months of uncertainty. My attorney's fees were eventually covered by the settlement, so the financial side worked out. But the stress was real. There were weeks where I genuinely did not know how it would land, where I was second-guessing whether going to the police that night in the garage had been the right call, whether a quieter resolution would have been easier. And then I remember the fines they had the audacity to issue me. Over $1,000 in penalties for parking in my own legally deeded property, sent to me in writing after they had already received a formal legal notice explaining exactly what that property was. That sequence of events removed any ambiguity about whether the response was proportionate. She did not just make a mistake, she pushed. Every time there was an off-ramp, she accelerated past it. The cease and desist was an off-ramp. The board meeting question was an off-ramp. The police officer standing in the garage was an off-ramp. She drove past all of them because she had never once in this entire situation considered the possibility that she was wrong. That is the thing about people like that. The confidence that makes them dangerous is the same confidence that eventually gets them. She was so certain that a parking spot in a condo building had to be HOA property that it never occurred to her to verify it. A 5-minute search on the county assessor's website would have shown her the parcel record. She could have done it before bolting the sign in. She could have done it after I asked her about my assigned spot. She could have done it after the cease and desist landed on the management office desk. She did not, because she was certain. And her certainty cost the entire HOA thousands of dollars in legal fees, cost her a seat on the board, and resulted in a permanent mounted sign in my parking spot that will still be there long after she has moved to some other building to bother some other group of people. I genuinely hope wherever she goes next, someone is ready for her. But probably they will not be, because people like that keep winning right up until they pick the wrong target. I am apparently the wrong target. The next one is a malicious compliance story. This happened about 8 years ago when I was still working for a North American Class 1 railroad. I worked in IT, specifically in a department whose primary role was to generate metrics and regulatory reporting for the Surface Transportation Board and their ilk. Most of our measures were inward-facing, though, covering such things as volume, dwell, revenue, and productivity. This story involves a problematic dashboard in the last category, specifically a measure of the productivity of our unionized office workers. The managers loved it because it gave them a weekly graph of who needed corrective punishment for underperforming. Our toxic CEO of the day was all about punishment. They even had quotas to meet. It was in regards to this last one that, I'll call him B, made the short walk across to our building so that he could ask me about the metric. He'd just come from an uncomfortable meeting with his direct manager who showed him how he was the lowest performing employee on their graph, by a wide margin. His manager told him to pick up the pace, or he'd face potential repercussions, possibly even a 1-week suspension. B came to me because he knew I had access to the back end of the metrics, and he wanted to know what they were measuring him on because he was never not busy. Some important background on B is that he was a very senior, conscientious employee. He had as much experience as the rest of his group combined, and he came to me because we went back about 20 years from my time in the union before I moved to IT. The job of their group was to work the queue, that is, go into the failure queue of events that had cacked for one reason or another, resolve the issue, and allow the automated functions to flow properly. A couple of trivial examples would be a train lift failing because the cars had not been properly reported into the customer's track, or, conversely, they'd been reported in, but the customer had not electronically released them out yet. Because he had so much experience, B took it upon himself to handpick the really messy, time-consuming ones from the queue, ones where somebody had backdated events and it took some faffing about to figure out what was wrong and what needed to be fixed, or where a conductor took all the paperwork home and forgot to update this tablet with the switching that he'd done. Basically, if it was something that might require phone calls and deep research, he would deal with it rather than let inexperienced folks struggle with it. I pulled up a pre-production version of the dashboard and scrolled through the source code to find the important bits. We discovered that it was looking for clusters of specific event types reported under an employee's user ID with at least a 2-minute gap between the clusters. He was puzzled over the last requirement, but I explained that it was so that a single train being processed would only count as one event. It might take a few minutes to fix the train, but the reporting was at the car level, and as long as no more than 2 minutes elapsed between the report on one car and the next, it would all count as a single incident to the dashboard. So it doesn't look at how many records you handle, only that they happen more than 2 minutes apart. He paused for a moment before adding, "That's really dumb. They don't care about complexity. They're seriously just counting how many times a person clicks OK. Somebody could game that pretty easily if they wanted, He walked away without saying anything else, but I could see the mental gears turning. He came back to me a couple of weeks later to give me the good news. He'd gone from being the most underperforming person in his group to being their top employee by just as big a margin. "It's great," he told me. "Forget all the complicated crap, I'm just grabbing the biggest trains from the queue. I work one screen of cars, then sit back and drink my coffee for exactly 3 minutes before I process the next. I finally have time to complete the crossword puzzle in my paper." Sadly, the company attributed his miraculous turnaround to their draconian discipline practices, and never clued in that while their numbers went up, their actual productivity had tanked a bit. The only real consequence to him was that his job became a lot easier and he got to slide into retirement on a high note. Anyway, thank you for watching.